In 1933, the United States government ordered every citizen to surrender their gold. Executive Order 6102, signed by President Franklin Roosevelt, made private ownership of gold bullion and certificates illegal. Americans had until May 1st to turn in their gold coins, bars, certificates to the Federal Reserve in exchange for paper dollars at a fixed rate of $20.67 per ounce. Refusal carried a penalty of 10 years in prison and a $10,000 fine, equivalent to nearly $200,000 today. Within months, the government had confiscated over 300 tons of gold from private hands. Then, in 1934, Roosevelt revalued gold to $35 per ounce. Overnight, the government had seized wealth at one price and revalued it at another, pocketing the difference. It was not taxation, it was confiscation, and it was perfectly legal because the law said so. But here's what almost no one asks: where did the gold go? The official story is that it was stored in Fort Knox, a newly constructed vault in Kentucky, except Fort Knox was not completed until 1937. So where was the gold kept for those 3 years? More importantly, how much gold is actually there now? Because the last public audit of Fort Knox was in 1953, no independent verification has been allowed since. The vault that supposedly holds the largest gold reserve in the world has not been fully inspected in over 70 years. Governments have always hoarded gold in moments of crisis, and they have always lied about how much they have. Because gold is not just wealth, it is credibility, the promise that currency has backing, the illusion that paper is tethered to something real. And when that illusion cracks, empires collapse. So governments guard gold reserves with secrecy, propaganda, and when necessary, violence. But history suggests that in almost every case, the gold was never where they said it was. By the time anyone checked, it was already gone. Let's start in 15th century Spain. After Columbus returned from the Americas in 1493, Spain became the wealthiest empire on earth. Silver from Potosi, gold from Mexico and Peru flowed into Seville in quantities Europe had never seen. Spanish galleons carried treasure across the Atlantic in convoys, unloading at the Casa de Contratación, the Royal Trade House. The gold was supposed to be stored in the royal treasury, backing Spanish currency and funding wars across Europe. Except most of it never stayed in Spain. It passed through. Spanish kings borrowed against future shipments to pay Italian and German bankers. The gold that arrived was immediately pledged to creditors. The vaults in Seville were full on paper, but empty in reality. When Spain defaulted in 1557, creditors discovered that the collateral they thought existed had already been spent years earlier. The gold had disappeared into wars, bribes, and debt service. Spain was bankrupt, despite controlling the largest flow of precious metals in history. The pattern became standard practice. Announce vast gold reserves to maintain confidence. Borrow against them. Spend the gold before it even arrives. And when creditors come asking, claim it is still in the vault, but cannot be shown for security reasons. Spain ran this con for a century until everyone stopped believing. Move forward to revolutionary France in 1789. The monarchy was drowning in debt. The treasury was empty. But France still claimed vast gold reserves held at the Bastille and in royal palaces. When the revolutionaries stormed the Bastille on July 14th, they expected to find the king's hoard. They found almost nothing. A few old weapons, some prisoners, and minimal gold. The reserves the monarchy had claimed for decades did not exist. The gold had been spent, lent out, or smuggled abroad years before. This discovery triggered a crisis of confidence. If the king's gold was a lie, what else was fabricated? The revolution radicalized partly because people realized the entire financial system was built on fraud. The assignats, the revolutionary paper currency, were initially backed by confiscated church lands. But when those lands were sold off and the money still ran out, the government simply printed more. There was no gold. There never had been. And once people understood that, the currency collapsed. The lesson from France is that gold reserves are political tools. Their function is not to back currency in practice, but to create the belief that backing exists. Actual redemption is rare. Most people never demand gold. They accept paper because they trust that someone, somewhere, could redeem it if they tried. But the moment that trust is tested, the vaults are opened, and the gold is not there, the system implodes. Now to the 20th century. After World War I, Britain was the world's financial center. The pound sterling was backed by gold held at the Bank of England, or so everyone believed. In reality, Britain had spent its gold reserves financing the war. By 1925, when Britain returned to the gold standard, the reserves were far smaller than publicly stated. The Bank of England borrowed gold from the United States to create the appearance of solvency. It was a shell game. Move gold in, show it to inspectors, move it out. The reserves were theatrical. When the Great Depression hit in 1929, depositors and foreign governments began demanding gold. Britain could not meet the demand. In 1931, Britain abandoned the gold standard entirely. The pound, once the most trusted currency in the world, was suddenly fiat paper backed by nothing. The reserves had been a lie, and once exposed, Britain's financial dominance ended. The United States, which still had gold, became the new anchor of global finance. But the United States was playing the same game. In 1933, Roosevelt confiscated private gold not to strengthen the dollar, but to prevent a run on the banks. If citizens could redeem dollars for gold, and they all tried at once, the system would collapse. So the government removed the option. It made gold ownership illegal and forced everyone to hold paper. Then it devalued the dollar by raising the gold price, effectively defaulting on its promise to maintain gold-dollar parity. The confiscated gold was supposedly moved to Fort Knox starting in 1937. The vault was built in Kentucky, far from the coasts, surrounded by military security. The public was told that the nation's gold was safe, guarded by the army, stored in an impenetrable facility, and for decades, that story held. But no independent audit has ever been conducted. Members of Congress have requested access. They have been denied. Journalists have asked for verification. They have been refused. The official position is that the gold is there, approximately 147 million ounces, worth over $400 billion at current prices. But no one outside the government has seen it in 70 years. Why does this matter? Because gold reserves are the foundation of currency credibility. If the gold is not there, the dollar is backed by nothing except military power and economic inertia. While that has been sufficient so far, it also means the system rests on trust, not substance. The moment trust breaks, there is no fallback, no tangible anchor, just paper and promises. There are reasons to doubt the official story. In 1971, President Nixon closed the gold window, ending the Bretton Woods system that allowed foreign governments to redeem dollars for gold. He did this because France, Germany, and other countries were demanding gold, and the United States did not have enough to meet those demands. Nixon claimed the closure was temporary. It has now been over 50 years. The gold window has never reopened. The reserves were sufficient. Why not allow redemption? Since 1971, the dollar has been pure fiat currency. It is backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government, a phrase that means nothing concrete. Faith is belief. Credit is trust. Neither is tangible. Dollar works because people accept it, not because it is redeemable for anything real. The gold in Fort Knox, if it exists, is irrelevant to daily currency function. It sits unused, a relic of a different era. But governments cling to the symbolism. They maintain the fiction that gold reserves exist because admitting otherwise would trigger questions. If the gold is gone, where did it go? Who sold it? Who profited? These questions lead to uncomfortable places, 2 secret loans, 2 off-book transactions, 2 the possibility that the gold was leased or swapped decades ago and never returned. Central banks lend gold to each other. They count leased gold as reserves even though they do not physically hold it. This creates phantom reserves, gold that appears on multiple balance sheets simultaneously. In the 1990s, rumors circulated that central banks, including the Federal Reserve, were lending gold to bullion banks to suppress the price. The theory, dismissed by officials as conspiracy, was that if gold prices rose too high, it would signal inflation and undermine confidence in fiat currencies. Central banks secretly leased gold to banks, which sold it on the open market, increasing supply and suppressing price. When the leases matured, the banks returned gold, but not the same physical bars. The gold was fungible. If the system ever broke down, it would be impossible to verify who actually owned what. This is not provable because the records are not public, but the behavior is consistent with historical patterns. Governments lie about gold when it benefits them, obscure reserves, manipulate data, and deny access to audits. The reason is always the same. The truth would destabilize the system. If people knew how little gold actually backed the currency, confidence would evaporate, so the lie is maintained. The gold is always in the vault until the moment you ask to see it. Now consider Germany. After World War II, Germany stored much of its gold reserves abroad, primarily in New York and London. This was a Cold War precaution. If the Soviets invaded, German gold would be safe outside Europe. By 2000, Germany held over 3,400 tons of gold, but only a fraction was in Frankfurt. The rest sat in vaults at the Federal Reserve in New York and the Bank of England in London. In 2012, German auditors requested a full inspection of the gold. The Federal Reserve refused. It offered to show a small sample, but would not allow verification of the entire reserve. German politicians demanded repatriation. In 2013, the Bundesbank announced a plan to bring 300 tons back to Germany over 7 years. 7 years to move 300 tons of gold that supposedly sat in a New York vault. Why so long? If the gold was there, it could be loaded onto a plane and flown to Frankfurt in a matter of weeks. The repatriation took longer than planned. When the gold finally arrived, it was not the same bars. The Federal Reserve had melted and recast them. Officially, this was standard procedure. Unofficially, it raised questions. If the original bars were there, why recast them? Was the Fed covering the fact that the original bars had been lent out, sold, or encumbered? No one knows because no one is allowed to ask. This is how the gold game works. Reserves exist on paper. Physical audits are blocked. When questions arise, small amounts are returned to create the appearance of compliance, but the full inventory is never verified. And the central banks that hold the gold operate in secrecy, shielded by national security justifications. The gold may be there, or it may be fractionally reserved, lent out multiple times, counted on several balance sheets. There is no way for the public to know, and that is the point. The system functions on opacity. If full transparency were required, the illusion would collapse. People would discover that the gold reserves are smaller than claimed, that the backing is partial, that the currency is effectively fiat even when governments pretend otherwise. So the secrecy is maintained. Fort Knox remains closed. Audits are refused. The official story persists. The gold is there. Trust us. But history says otherwise. Spain's gold vanished into debt. France's gold never existed. Britain's gold was borrowed and faked. And America's gold has not been independently verified since 1953. The pattern is consistent. Governments claim gold reserves to maintain credibility. They spend or lend the gold in secret. And when the truth starts to surface, they close access, deny audits, and rely on the public's short memory. So where is the gold? Some is in Fort Knox. Some is in New York, London, and other central bank vaults. Some has been lent out and may never be returned. Some was sold decades ago and never reported. And some exists only on balance sheets, a number in a ledger with no physical bars behind it. The total is unknowable because verification is impossible. And as long as no one demands redemption, the question remains academic. But if a crisis ever forces mass redemption, if a major economy demands its gold back and the vaults cannot deliver, the game ends. The currency backed by phantom reserves collapses, and the gold that was supposed to anchor the system is revealed as a myth. It disappeared long ago, spent quietly, lent secretly, and replaced with paperwork and promises. The gold that built empires has become the gold that no one can see. And as long as no one looks, the system survives. But the moment someone opens the vault, history suggests it will be empty, just as it always has been.